Hey guys, my name's Rich. In this video I'm going to be showing you the 7 rules I follow to create an amazing Act 1. Let's dive in. Number 1 is to start smaller than you think. This rule is huge. Not literally though, it's obviously smaller than you think. This rule is so important because the reason we start smaller than you think is kind of twofold. The first one is that you don't want to give away all of your musical material. You kind of want to hold your cards close to your chest in Act 1 because you're saving all of that for Act 3. You're saving the big reveal for Act 3 and, a little bit in Act 2. The other aspect of it is that if you start with lots of things going on and quite loud, then that doesn't give you enough room for dynamic growth in your track. And it's just an easy win. Watch a few trailers and you'll see how small the first 5, 10, 15 seconds often are. Like a single drone, a single ping, a single sub boom. It's just there to bring us in to the Act 1. So start smaller than you think. Second rule is think of landscapes. Now this applies to when you're writing your Act 1. What you're essentially doing is setting the scene like a landscape. Often with, say, big sci-fi epic movies, you will start to see the setting of the trailer. You will start to see the setting of the film. And that's what we want to try and do in Act 1. We want to try and lay the landscape down. Now the easiest way to do that is often using drones or pads that imply this sense of a landscape. It doesn't, we don't want anything that sounds too close. We want them to sound kind of distant, drenched in reverb, with this kind of like wispy length to them. Now the reason we give them length, the reason we make them long notes, is to imply this scale of the landscape, this large landscape. When something is slow moving, it implies that it is bigger. And that's what we're doing here. We're painting a landscape. I usually use synth washes for this one to paint the landscape. I start nice and small and then I layer in some synth washes or harmonics that will bring in the sense of a landscape. Number 3 is to create atmosphere. Now, I've already mentioned this when you're talking about landscapes, but one of the easiest ways to create a sense of atmosphere is to give the listener a sense of a physical space. And how do we do that? Aside from playing in the music, we give it a reverb. Now what we're trying to do here is, say, if we're playing a piano motif, we want to say to them, hey, this piano motif is in a physical space. So we give it its own reverb, or at least we use one of the reverb buses to imply this sense of atmosphere. Obviously you can as well, within your track, use the way you write to create the atmosphere. We're using your melodies and harmonies in a clever way to imply a sense of mood. So I'm not necessarily talking mood here, I'm talking about atmosphere, and character to it. And the easiest way to do that is by putting lots of reverb on. I've done this in lots of videos, and I talk about it in lots of videos. You've got a simple idea, play it and put it in a reverb. Immediately you have a sense of atmosphere, and that's exactly what we want in Act 1. Rule number 4, imply distance. Now, I talked about this a lot. The way bass frequencies work is they don't get absorbed so quickly or so easily, so they can travel further. So if something huge like an explosion happens in the distance, we hear the bass frequencies if we are miles away, because the higher frequencies have been absorbed. Now what we do in trailer music, to imply that some distant explosion has happened, we use sub booms, or at least one-shot impacts that don't have a lot of high frequency information. If you don't have any of those, then you can just use a massive, huge explosive impact and just roll off the high end. You could go really hardcore with it. You could roll it off down to so it's a low pass of 300, something like that. But it's up to you and the context of your track. But what we do here is this kind of like sound implies that something is happening in the distance. It implies this, in this landscape that we've set, with this atmosphere, something big is happening. Rule number 5, grab their attention. Now, you'll hear this in countless trailers, the ping noise. That is kind of like the chiming of the bell, the slap in the face. It's not always a ping, but what that ping does is grab your attention. It's like, hey, wake up. And that's what we need to do in Act 1. We can't just sort of sit in this sort of wispy, atmospheric world of sub-booms and drones. We have to bring the listener into the trailer. And the quickest and easiest way to do that is with some kind of tonal sound. It could be a ping, it could be a distant bram, it could even be your signature sound. I do like using a signature sound in Act 1. It might not be the exact same signature sound, it might be filtered in some way, but I like using that because what we do there is twofold. The first one, and the really important one, is we give the track character because it has this signature sound, this sound that's like its fingerprint. The second thing we do is we grab their attention, which is rule number 5, grab their attention. So once you've got your small start, your landscape, your atmosphere, your implied distance, now you've grabbed their attention with a signature sound. The next thing you need to do is rule number 6, build the tension. I love building the tension in tracks because it's incredibly easy with the tools that we have at our disposal. The biggest one being risers. I absolutely love risers. You can layer them until the cows come home, and the more you layer, the more wonderful and tense it sounds. Obviously, this isn't going to always work in some genres of music. We can't have a ton of horror-style risers on a kind of uplifting family adventure track. That wouldn't quite work. A riser would work there, a white noise riser perhaps, or just a simple string riser. But the riser is one tool for building tension. The way we build tension, you could use harmony build tension, you could use melody, you could use textures or timbres or more complicated rhythms. But the idea is that you want to imply a sense of building up to the stop down before Act 2. Which is when the main character is thrown into the new world or thrown into a problem. We are building up to that point. So however you do it, as long as you do it, is the important thing here. Build the tension. And lastly, rule number 7 is hold back. I don't mean hold back on everything. I mean, we're talking about your melodies and harmonies. We're talking about don't throw away all of your musical material in Act 1. Say you've got a chord sequence of, 1-4-5, a jolly 1-4-5. You don't really want to throw that all in Act 1. You can, but you hold it back. Whether that's through filtering or whether that's through instrumentation. It could be that is implied in the bass. It could be that it's implied by some distant piano. You just kind of want to give a tease as to what is to come. Because what you're doing in Act 1 is you're setting the scene of the characters and the landscape and the world, but you're also bringing the listener into it's not staying like this. It is going to change. And that's what we're trying to do with the holding back. We imply that it's going to change and it's going to become something, but we don't want to give away all of our cards. Whether you hold back on the melody, whether you hold back on the harmony, it's up to you. I tend to copy and paste my main motif and just delete a load of notes. So it's kind of like a broken version of the full motif is in there. And like I do the other things with it, I put it into a reverb to create atmosphere, yada yada yada, and then I make sure that we get this build. Now those 7 rules are the 7 rules I use every single time I write an Act 1. And Act 1s are my favourite thing to write, and I've landed a lot of trailers with my Act 1s. And if you follow these rules, you will find it much easier to create amazing sounding Act 1s. Thanks for listening, you guys are absolute legends.